Hello.
Good evening. Welcome to the conference, Geraldine. We will be commencing soon. So I'm just giving it another 1 minute for everyone to enter and then I will explain everything. Okay. Just make sure everyone is. So, everyone, I'm just going to ensure that everyone is muted for the conference and then we can begin. Okay, awesome. Okay, everyone. Welcome to the conference with Le Cercle des Langues. I am Chanel Davids and I will be, or Chanel Garcia, and I will be taking you through the conference this evening. We will be discussing presenting data with impact. So, how do we present information in an impactful way? For the first 20 minutes of our conference, we will just have the presentation, 25 minutes, excuse me. And for the last 5 minutes, I will answer any questions or any comments that you would like to make on the presentation. Please feel free to put all of your questions either on a piece of paper or in the chat, and we will have a look at them when we are done. So, please note for the presentation, it will be sent to you via email after the conference, or I think probably on Monday. So let's begin. So, presenting data or information with impact. So, today we are going to cover 4 parts. We are going to cover the first, which is knowing your audience. How do we know our audience or get to know our audience? Number 2 is the types of graphics. So, types of informational charts that we can use to display our data. Number 3 talks about using adjectives. So, we are going to look at adjectives that help us describe certain parts of information that could be useful. And for the last part, we are going to look at comparisons and trends. So, how people are displaying and showing their data or their data these days. So, let's start with the introduction. How to describe graphics and images in a professional context. Effective communication of data involves describing graphics and images accurately. That meaning that it's important that whatever someone is seeing, they understand and it is clear. So, knowing our audience, know your audience. Considering the audience when presenting data, and you need to tailor your descriptions to match the level of understanding of your audience. When we talk about knowing our audience, it's important to have industry knowledge. So, knowing who your audience is, understanding your market, understanding your products, if that is your specialty. We need to assess the level of industry or subject specific knowledge your audience possesses. We also need to have interactive engagement. So, when we understand our audience, we understand how they will answer questions. And we need to encourage questions and participation to gauge understanding. So we also have different ways that we can assess the level of industry or subject knowledge. We can take surveys, we can do focus groups, or we can do one-on-one interviews. There are many ways to gain this knowledge, and those are just 3 examples. So focus groups, surveys, one-on-one interviews. Those are ways that we gain knowledge and perspective on our audience. We also need to understand the ESL level of our audience. We need to consider the English proficiency level of your audience, if they are speaking English or if they are speaking another language. That's also important. Adapt your language complexity to ensure comprehension. So When we understand the level of language or the proficiency in language of our audience, we are able to adapt the kind of vocabulary and language that we use for that audience. We also have to be mindful of cultural sensitivity. We need to be aware of cultural differences that may affect interpretation. We need to avoid assumptions about cultural familiarity with certain graphics. So it's very important to understand how certain things could be interpreted as to not offend our audience. So let's take a look at types of graphics. So the first type of graphic you could find is known as a bar chart. And an example of a bar chart is on the right-hand side of the screen. The length of each bar corresponds to the value it represents. So an example description: in this bar chart, the vertical bars represent the sales figures for each month. January has the highest bar, indicating the highest sales. So what we can see often is that the dual bar chart to show the eye color of year 7 and year 8 students. So by the bar, we can see in year 7, which is displayed by the orange, which is the highest, and the highest color is blue. And we can see by the purple that year 8, the highest color is also blue. Unfortunately, there is not a figure, but if we are to look at the frequency bar, we can see that that color is around 28 or 29, which is the highest. So this is a bar chart. The second kind of graphic that is most common is a line graph. Okay, a line graphs illustrate trends over time by connecting data points with lines. We had a conference 2 weeks ago that spoke about visual representations when we have a presentation. How important is the visual? And it showed that over a course of time, 60 to 70% of the information that we retain, that we keep, is visual. So this is why graphics is so important. And when we are talking about a line graph, this line graph shows the progression of website traffic over the past year. The upward trend suggests a steady increase in visits. So what can we see? If we look at the bottom, we can see the days of the week, and on the side, we can see the number of hours. So when we say in English, when we plot those points, we can actually see how that line grows and changes, which gives us a clear indication of whether our data is successful, unsuccessful, or unsuccessful. Another type of graphic is a pie chart. So pie charts divide a whole into slices, with each slice representing a percentage of the total. So the graphic on the side shows us what a pie chart looks like. So if we were to give an example description, we would say in this pie chart, each segment represents the proportion of expenses in our budget. The large slice at 35% represents office supplies. So looking at this pie chart, it would be different, because what we would say is we would look at the figures it is giving us. And in this, it says number of participants per game. We can see the first is Monopoly, second Candyland, the third Jenga, the fourth chess, the fifth Twister, then poker, then Uno. And if we were to compare the description or use it in this regard, we would say in this segment, in this pie chart, each segment represents the number of participants per game. So the percentage of participants per game. As you can see, a segment refers to the piece of the pie. And we can see that Monopoly has the most participants per game. Scatter plots. Scatter plots display individual data points highlighting the relationship between two variables. An example description for a scatter plot would be: the scatter plot reveals a positive correlation between hours of study and exam scores. As study hours increase, so do the exam scores. So what we are looking for here is how something is directly proportional to something else. And that could be used as this can be used as an interesting graphic as well. Flowcharts. Flowcharts use shapes and arrows to represent processes or workflows. For example, this flowchart outlines the customer purchase process. Rectangles indicate steps and arrows show the direction of the process. Flowcharts are often the easiest to use to represent data because they show a process. And in many presentations, we often show how one thing will lead to another. So again, a very popular display for graphics. Diagrams. Diagrams visually represent structures or systems using labeled components and connections. If we look at the description, if we were to give an example, we'd say this diagram illustrates the components of a computer system. Arrows indicate the flow of data between the different parts. And heat maps. Heat maps use color variations to represent values in a matrix or a table, as you can see on the right-hand side. This heat map depicts customer satisfaction across different regions. The darker shades represent higher satisfaction levels, and the lower may be less satisfaction. So when we are giving these descriptions, it's important to remember that you need to choose the chart that works for you and that works for the data that you are trying to display. When we look at the tips for descriptions, we need to focus on the key elements. For example, the title, the axis labels, the data points, and the trends. We use adjectives to convey the significance of the data points. And we relate the information back to the audience's context for better understanding. So using adjectives. Using adjectives are important because it offers a description. So we are going to look at a number of adjectives that one can use when speaking about data. Adjectives play a crucial role in painting a vivid picture when describing graphics. They add precision and depth to your analysis. So let's look at some examples of adjectives. The word significant. Example, there is a significant increase in sales during the holiday season. That means there is a large increase, or you can see the growth. It's very evident. Gradual. Example, the decline in customer satisfaction is gradual, suggesting a long-term issue. Gradual shows that it's something that happens slowly. Sharp. Example, there is a sharp rise in website traffic following the new marketing campaign. We often use sharp, and the word that we can understand is sudden because it happens very quickly. Steady. Example, the graph shows a steady decline in production costs over the past quarter. Steady is a lot more along the lines of stable. So stable and steady are almost in the same group. They mean almost the same thing. Prominent. Example, the prominent spike in the chart indicates a sudden surge in demand, encouraging precise language. Consider the magnitude, the direction, and the speed of your changes when choosing adjectives. So whatever you are trying to describe, you have an adjective that can really reinforce and support what it is that you are trying to say. So a quantitative description, so that is what we are looking at next. Numbers are the backbone of data descriptions, providing a concrete foundation for understanding. Precision is key in quantitative descriptions. So quantitative means when we can count it, when there are numbers involved. So decision making. Precise numbers aid decision-making processes. For example, investing in the new marketing strategy resulted in a 25% increase in customer engagement. Incorporating quantitative data means when we use numerical values when describing data points, trends, and changes over time. Integrate percentages to highlight proportions or growth rates. This also gives us a good base for a strong argument. Clarity. Specific numbers eliminate ambiguity. Ensure a clear understanding of the data. Example, the sales increased by 15%. Let's think about a comparison. Quantitative data allows for effective comparison between different points. For example, compared to last year, profits have risen by $500,000. So with clarity and with quantitative data, we are able to make a good comparison to show growth. Comparisons and trends. Identifying and articulating trends. Upward trends. When we talk about upward trends, we talk about trends using terms like increase, rise, or upward trends. That shows the upper level, the growth of those trends. But downward trends use terms like decrease, decline, downward trend for decreasing values. Encourage contextual interpretation. Emphasize the importance of interpreting trends within the context of the specific data and the overall narrative of what you are trying to say. When comparing data points, it's important to highlight differences. Compare data points by focusing on differences in values. Example, the sales in the third quarter or Q3 are 10% higher than in Q2. Or a relative comparison. For example, when we use phrases like compared to or relative to emphasize relationships between data points. For example, the revenue in the US is higher compared to Europe. So in conclusion, to sum it up, describing graphs and charts professionally is like telling a story with numbers. We've learned some important things today. For example, it's important to know your audience. Think about who you're talking to and adjust your words to make sure that everyone understands. With our use of adjectives like special describing words make your descriptions more interesting and clear. For example, instead of saying sales went up, you can say sales increased significantly. It's important to remember that numbers matter. Be specific with numbers and percentages. It helps people see the real picture. Instead of saying a lot, say sales went up by 15%. So before we have our Q&As, I would like to draw our attention again to the adjectives. These adjectives can really help us when it comes to speaking about what we want to get across. There are many, many others. However, it's important that these that we have, we can use them and they are readily available to us. For example, significant, gradual, sharp, steady, prominent. Let's look, and we need to consider the magnitude and the direction and the speed of the changes when we choose our adjectives. So for a final look, we have e-learning modules that are available for you. So besides the presentation that you will receive after the conference, we have the analysis of figures, which is level A2, B1, B2, and C1. So if you feel like you are at a B1 level, it's great. You can try A2 and you can move up to test the level of difficulty for yourself. We also have an article from Le Cercle des Langues blog. Comment décrire des tableaux et des graphiques en anglais. And this is particularly important because you can then see what the terminology is in English, what are those words that are used in English, and what they are in French, so that you know how to use them in both languages. And finally, related to the conference, we have impactful business presentations. So this conference is available on replay if there are any other parts of information that you would like to check. So thank you for joining us. I would like to open the conversation to anyone who, Christine, Olga, or Geraldine, if you have any comments or things that you would like to share or ask on the conference this evening. No? Okay, so everything is good on your side. So again, just a quick reminder. No, my absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone. So if everything was clear, everything will be sent to you after the conference, I think by Monday. And I hope that all of your presentations will go successfully. So thank you for joining me this evening and have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everyone.